Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise this afternoon to support the amendments before us insofar as these three pieces of legislation. When I note the observations from the members opposite and the overarching suggestion and the view that we should essentially leave the business of sentencing to jurists and not go the route as legislators to legislate mandatory sentences. You get the impression, Mr. President, that there is no mischief to be corrected, no gap or deficiency to be addressed. And I wish to submit at the very outset that that is not the case. We have a mischief to correct. We have mischief to address, because the truth is, for us on this side, we place a premium on the democracy within which we operate, and we are guided by the sentiments of the public. We note, we hear the frustration of the public, and we are Democrats at heart, and we seek to respond appropriately, utilizing the tools as government-side legislators at our disposal, Mr. President, and we are unequivocal and unapologetic in that regard. Why do I start here? Mr. President, Giovanni Ellis, the person who was identified as a person of interest in the brutal rape, murder, and stuffing in a barrel of young Kelsey Cassidy Ferrigon in Central St. Catherine is a gentleman who was before the courts before, is a gentleman who had come into conflict with the law before. And the sentiment of the Jamaican people in the case of Giovanni Ellis, as has been the case in other instances where people have been let out back on the streets of Jamaica, and it is in the view and estimation of the Jamaican people that the punishment they got, the number of years to which they were sentenced by our criminal justice system, was insufficient relative to the crime for which they were convicted. That is what the government is responding to, in part, by way of these amendments before us. Yes? So to be very clear, Mr. President, it is important as a nation of laws and institutions, not of men. It is important, given our fine democratic traditions, for us to take note as legislators of the sentiments, the frustrations, and of course, the pleadings of the Jamaican people, and have those situated in what we come here to do. And so, Mr. President, as set out in this piece of legislation, the Offences Against the Person Act, and of course, the attendant Criminal Justice Administration Act, the proposed increase in the minimum mandatory sentences, yes, reflects responsiveness on the part of the government to a most vexing issue. Mr. President, the foremost duty and responsibility of a government is the safety and security of its citizens. While Senator Peter Bunting abdicated, when he served as National Security Minister, threw his proverbial hands in the air, bawled, and called for divine intervention. And quite frankly, nothing is wrong with invoking, yes, faith-based underpinnings and beliefs. But that must be paired, Mr. President, with tangible and intentional action on the part of policymakers and actors to whom state power is entrusted. You don't have the luxury of abdicating. And on this side, we are not in the business of abdicating. We are not in the business of throwing in the towel. And so we will pursue the marauding gunmen and the menacing criminals in our society. And we will ensure that the toughest and strongest penalties are meted out to them. Mr. President, some years ago, there was a conscience vote in this parliament. And so for those who would seek to castigate former National Security Minister Bunting for his perspective on the matter of the death penalty, they can go that route. Yes? But what is not to be overlooked, Mr. President, is that by virtue of the investments and the hard work that has been undertaken by this Andrew Holness-led Jamaica Labour Party government, we are at a point at present when all the critical elements have come together, where there is greater certainty of punishment. And so for us, we are not only about the severity of punishment, because we are very mindful of the dynamics of the correctional services and of our penal system. Yes, persons are sentenced as part of the sanctions for having committed themselves, having committed offenses, and they undergo a period of incarceration in many instances, but they go to jail, or to prison rather, as punishment. Not for punishment, as punishment. But what we have managed to do over these past 9.5 years, Mr. President, is to get to a point of greater certainty in punishing offenders. There is no hiding place. And as I said sort of earlier, not even at a villa in Portland there is hiding place nowadays. Now we are unequivocal in that regard. We are pursuing the criminals. We have brought all the critical elements together. And that is why we are where we are at present. In terms of persons who make a determination to commit crime, they best understand and believe that the days of doing so and committing crimes with impunity are long gone. Those days are now, Mr. President, in the rearview mirror where Jamaica is concerned. We are, Mr. President, at a historical and epochal point. The investments in and the provision of the human, financial, infrastructural, strategic and tactical assets, as well as the legislative resources in this country, have been unprecedented under this government. Never before have we seen the investments in the human resources of the Jamaica Constabulary Force in the history of Jamaica in the way we have invested in them in this iteration. Never before have we seen the investments, the financial resource investments in the Constabulary Force and in crime fighting in general here in Jamaica as we are seeing in this dispensation, Mr. President. You would have heard Senator Sinclair earlier outlining some of the police stations that have since been rehabilitated, and some have been newly built. Yes? Not least the one at Olympic Gardens, not least the one at Froome in Westmoreland, and several others around the country, including Shady Grove up in Senator Crawford's, where he's aspiring to be Member of Parliament, up in St. Catherine, Northwestern. So just to be very clear, Mr. President, All of these investments taken together have resulted in the architecture and the crime-fighting apparatus that we have at present. Unbeknown to some who will try to weave a certain narrative to suggest that, yes, we had periods in time in recent years where we had crime being in excess of 1,300. Little do they know and appreciate, Mr. President, that while that was the case, the hard and painstaking investments, the important investments in our national security architecture were being made such that we can now be enjoying a 44% reduction in murders since the start of calendar year 2025. Mr. President, as is being, colleagues, they can try as they might. Mr. President, as we speak, at the Montego Bay Community Center in Montego Bay, St. James, and at the National Arena here in St. Andrew, here in the corporate area, the men and women of the Jamaica Constabulary Force are putting on a fantastic and compelling show, Mr. President. Never before in the history of Jamaica has the Jamaica Constabulary Force had the capabilities that it boasts today. And those are on show as we speak at the National Arena and at the auditorium at the Montego Bay Community College. Mr. President, the constabulary is at its establishment in excess of 14,000 men and women at the disposal of the Chief Constable, that being the Police Commissioner. Mr. President, the forensic and investigative capabilities of the JCF has also been considerably enhanced on account of the investments that have been made. I speak of the forensics laboratory, for example. Of course, I would have alluded earlier to the infrastructure, the state of many police stations, the facilities that these hardworking men and women have to go to every day as they serve, protect, and reassure us. And so, Mr. President, all those things taken together have served to boost the morale of the men and women in the JCF, and they have served to bring the capabilities and the capacity of the JCF to unprecedented levels at present. So much so that from time to time when we hear reportage in the media of the commission of criminal offenses, murders and other crimes, we often hear of some clear-up shortly thereafter. That was not the case in a dispensation past, Mr. President. And we on this side are proud of those gains, and we are proud of those strides the JCF has been making. And so, Mr. President, for us, it is not surprising that we are seeing a 44% reduction in murders. It is not surprising for us, Mr. President, consequent on the investments that have been made in crime fighting, in making the people of Jamaica safer, that almost all the police divisions across Jamaica are recording and experiencing reductions in murders since the start of this calendar year. 17 of the 19 police divisions, Mr. President, are seeing reductions in murders. And that is unprecedented, and I dare say that is commendable. Mr. President, there are 14, as the National Security Minister has indicated. There have been 14 consecutive weeks since March of this calendar year of reduction in murders below 15, yes, for each week. Just recently, Mr. President, it came to light that for the entire month of May, there was no murder in the town of Maypen. And for those of us who can recall and appreciate what the Police Division of Clarendon has been in recent years, we will know that that is not a small deal. That is, in fact, a big deal. Because Maypen, the citizens down there will tell you, for many years, has not been a playpen. And for there to be no murders in Maypen for the entire month of May, that is commendable and that is unprecedented. Mr. President, there is an almost 70% reduction in murders in St. James. And not dissimilar to the observation I made just now regarding Maypen, St. James is in fact a commendable turnaround story, because we know of the bloodshed and the bloodletting that over many years has taken place in that particular policing space. We know of Bebe Stevens, the pioneer of the lottery scam, a gentleman who was ostensibly associated with the PNP's constituency organization in West Central St. James. Yes? Is it Kevin or Kenrick? Kenrick Bebe Stevens, the godfather, the pioneer and the father of the lottery scamming. We have had considerable bloodshed in St. James as a parish as a result of the lottery scam. Yeah? And so, Mr. President, a wise man made mention in recent days that time is a relentless master. Indeed, time, it is said, has a spanner to fit every knot. For years, Mr. President, the government's detractors, the government's critics, many of them are among the members opposite, went about asking about crime plan and so on. It has to be noted, Mr. President, it has to be underscored and it has to be telegraphed to them. It has to be telegraphed to the members opposite, our detractors and critics where crime fighting is concerned, that heights by great men, reached and kept, were not attained, Mr. President, by sudden flight. For they, while their companions grandstand and ask about where's the crime plan, were upward toiling through the night. And the truth of the matter is that the results in crime fighting, the results in the sustained reduction in murders that we're seeing today, Mr. President, is as a result of the investments that have been made. So while others sat on the sidelines criticizing and asking about crime plan, there were those among us who were busy making the investments and of course, yes, and of course, putting in the work to bring us to the point where we are at present today. And so, you know, Mr. President, like the upcoming general elections, you know, because I'm noting those babbling across the aisle, the race is not for the swift. It is indeed for those who can endure. You're a cream crackers, man. You're a soft soap. Peter Bunting, a soft soap. Mr. President, the recent judgment of the court on the matter of the SOEs brings into sharp focus where we are as a country and indeed where we have been as a country. Mr. President, over many years we have been racking up a murder tally year over year in excess of 1,000. In many instances, we have gone in excess of 1,300, and we have hit, of course, the 1,600 mark. We became the murder capital of the world in 2005 under the PNP government of that period, under Prime Minister Patterson, who ruled the roost back in that dispensation. And it is quite sad, Mr. President, even as we note the judgment, and I join with Senator Sinclair in welcoming the fact that that particular judgment will be appealed or is being appealed, is a subject of appeal. It is quite sad, Mr. President, quite sad, that having regard to the crime rate, to the crime wave that has confronted us as a people, that we have invariably become almost desensitized. It is quite befuddling and concerning at the same time that the scourge of criminality in Jamaica has been almost normalized, such that there are some among us, even to this very day, including some in the precincts of this chamber, would believe that for us to be racking up in excess of 1,300 murders and 1,400 murders and even 1,200 murders plus, that is not essentially in the range of emergency. So, Mr. President, we have had many incidents of murder that are shocking to our collective conscience. You will recall a few years ago in Chapelton, Clarendon, Roshane Barnett perpetrated a most gruesome and horrific multiple murder. He wiped out an entire family. He wiped out a mother and I believe her 4 children, including one of the children, who was seeking to escape. She was seeking to flee. And Roshane Barnett, who thankfully is now in our penal institutions, perpetrated that. And what I have found, Mr. President, is that notwithstanding many of these incidents of murder and these scenarios that have been particularly repugnant, revolting, and I dare say, shocking to our collective conscience as a people, when you listen to the discourse, certainly the narrative and the rhetoric emanating from some quarters, it is as though, Mr. President, there is a greater premium, there is a greater concern for those persons who are alleged perpetrators than there is for the victims themselves. And it makes you wonder, Mr. President, how can it be? Why is it like that? When lives are being snuffed out, the victims for the most part are poor, black Jamaicans who are domiciled in, marginalized and oppressed, or well, let me say, depressed communities. But when you hear some of the commentators, people who I would better describe as bleeding hearts, Mr. President, you get the sense that they are trying to play on the emotions of our people. When you hear them say, yes, when you hear them wax warm, and some of them are ostensibly ensconced in civil society and say that they are a part of civil society organizations. When you listen to them, you get the clear sense that they have more concern for the alleged and accused perpetrators than the victims themselves. So they try to play on the psyche of listeners, and they try to exploit the emotions of people by saying that the police are pursuing poor, black, inner city men. But if you think about it, what is the profile of the typical and average victim of murders in the country? What is the profile of our victims? The profile of our victims are essentially poor, black, marginalized, and inner city men. Excuse me. That is the profile of the average victim. And so it behooves these civil society organizations, yes, it is incumbent on them, Mr. President, to demonstrate, in as much as they ostensibly and are demonstrably preoccupied with the fortunes of alleged and suspected offenders. Yeah? It is incumbent on them to do similarly where the victims of crime is concerned. Mr. President, the Prime Minister has mentioned and spoke in very clear terms in recent days of the collaboration that the government enjoys with our overseas partners, our international partners. That collaboration, Mr. President, has been serving us well because it is creating conditions where it is a reality that the criminals no longer have the hiding places to which they would typically retreat. Yeah? They don't have the hiding places to which they would retreat. So when persons would seek to commit crimes and then go cool out in New York or cool out up in Toronto, having regard to the collaboration with our international partners, those days are essentially at an end. And I am commending, Mr. President, stiffer penalties as well for those persons who are domiciled or located overseas, who may order, are in the business of ordering murder, they are in the business of aiding and abetting murder. But they believe that because they are, situated outside of Jamaica's borders, that they can't be reached. Those perpetrators, Mr. President, those persons in the Jamaican diaspora, for example, who order, who direct, who aid and abet the commission of murders here in Jamaica should also be subject to the stiffest penalties available under Jamaican law. So, Mr. President, as I wrap up, the senator opposite, former National Security Minister Peter Bunting, has pointed out, as he has done in the past, Mr. President, that in terms of murder tally, what we have seen in the past 2 terms is the highest number of Jamaicans murdered. The truth of the matter, Mr. President, is that when the Jamaica Labour Party, shut your mouth and learn something. When the Jamaica Labour Party took office in February 1989, demitted office rather in February 1989, Mr. President, murders for the calendar year 1988 was in the order of 439. Yes? Murders for calendar year 1988, 5 years old, was in the order of 439. And Mr. President, that kind of intellectual dishonesty and disingenuous reasoning by Senator Bunting has to be exposed, is being exposed, and is being denounced in the strongest terms. Because the truth of the matter is that they bequeathed murders in terms of a murder tally in calendar year for 1988 of 439. And by 2005, they took murders to 1,600 plus, such that Jamaica became the murder capital of the world. So when you took us to the ridiculous highs and the norms of well in excess of 1,000 murders, how can you turn around, having taken us to those new heights? Yes? Having taken us to those new heights, how can you try and turn around when we have been committing murders and having murders in excess of 1,000 for each calendar year, to say that this block of time has had the greatest aggregation of murders? That's a disingenuous reasoning, because you, the PNP, and you were a member of that government in 1993, 1993 to 1997, you were a member of that government. You know what is true? Your success is Jamaica's distress. That is what the truth is. Because you are the direct beneficiary of the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in this country. So don't talk to us about truth. Yes? So, Mr. President, I stand in support of these amendments and the 3 pieces of legislation that they touch and concern. I commend the hardworking men and women of the JCF, and I indeed commend the government for its unprecedented investments in our national security architecture, which, Mr. President, is yielding dividends, is bearing fruit insofar as the sustained reductions in murders that we're seeing here in Jamaica. For calendar year 2023, we had an 8% reduction in murders. For calendar year 2024, we had a 19% reduction in murders. And I dare say, Mr. President, I dare say, for 2025 year to date, the reduction in murders is in the order of 44%. I thank you, Mr. President. May it please you.